Good morning, colleagues. So we're going to get started with our first interviewer. Okay, thank you so much.
All right. Hello. All right. All right. Good morning. Right.
Good morning, Mr. Cook.
Hello.
It's good to see you.
Likewise.
I really appreciate you applying for to be a member of the Board of Appeals. I think what we'll do very quickly is just go around and introduce ourselves. I'm Nancy Navarro, and I'm the president of the County Council. I'm also representative of District 4.
Okay.
I'm Sidney Katz. I'm the vice president of the County Council, and I represent District 3, which is Rockville, Gaithersburg, all the way down to Leisure.
Okay.
And we can use our microphones. Yeah. There.
No. Evan Glass, member of the council in an at-large capacity.
All right.
Good morning. Andrew Friedson. I represent District 1, which is the southwestern portion of Montgomery County. So
Okay.
Bethesda, Chevy Chase, Kensington, North Bethesda, Potomac, all the way up to Poolsville.
Okay.
Hi, good morning. I'm Gabe Albornoz. I'm one of the at-large members of the council as well.
All right.
And I'm Hans Reamer, one of your at-large council members.
Okay.
Will Jawando, at-large council member, NCC.
All right.
Great, so we're going to start with some prepared questions, and then we will open it to see if colleagues have any questions or comments. Very general question, why do you want to become a member of the Board of Appeals? You're good.
Well, basically, I want to become a member of the Board of Appeals because I feel like I have a lot to offer to the county. Specifically, I've been a homeowner in the county for the past 10 years. I am very committed, I guess you could say, to a kind of better relationship with developers and the community, being in such that it seems like there's a lot of conflict between developers and residents, and I think that it would be very helpful to have somebody like myself that is just a homeowner be on the Board of Appeals to kind of give that regular touch.
Okay, and so what in your background prepares you to serve on this board?
Well, I've been a homeowner for the past 10 years. I used to be on a board of the Community Block Development Grant Board, which gave me a little bit of familiarity with the county government. I am in the process of trying to remodel my own home, so it's given me a little bit more insight into the codes and how they can be very difficult to decipher, I guess, sometimes, and to get people in trouble, I suppose. And this is, again, something that I've been interested in as far as construction and real estate and those types of topics for a fairly long time.
Okay. Tell us about a time where you have helped to achieve consensus among groups or individuals with different points of view.
Well, in a nutshell, there was an instance. I'm a former military. I was in the Marine Corps. I was enlisted very long ago, before Desert Storm, or after Desert Storm, but before Iraqi freedom. But if you've ever been in the military, you have to work in a small unit, and normally those units don't really get along so well. Long story short, there was a conflict within my group in boot camp, and this was actually very, very soon in the process. And if we had not gotten that kind of thing straightened out, it would have been a very difficult 3 months for everybody. And I helped. I didn't do it all myself, but basically contributed to kind of reaching a consensus, which was that we're all in this together, and if we fight each other, then the drill instructors are going to win.
Thank you. Please explain your understanding of the role of the Board of Appeals and how it serves our community.
It's my understanding that the board basically operates as it's titled, it's the Board of Appeals when there's some kind of conflict between an individual that has, or a company, that has some kind of issue with a decision that's been reached as far as their code goes, and they want to appeal it. It will be appealed before this board, and the board has to decide yay or nay what's going to happen, exactly what the decision is going to be, and it has to be reached between the members of the board so that that person can have some kind of resolution.
In your opinion, is it more important for the board to reach its decisions by consensus or by a simple majority, and why?
If I had to choose, I would always choose consensus, simply because it's better to have a unified front. Sometimes consensus is impossible, in which case, obviously, you want to go with the simple majority, but I would always prefer a consensus if it is all possible to reach.
Are there any potential conflicts of interest of which we should be aware? Will you be able to make the time commitment required for the service on this board?
There are none that I'm aware of. I am employed as basically a territory manager for an oil and gas retail organization that's headquartered in Virginia and does all of our business in D.C. Other than that, I don't know of any conflicts of interest. And yes, I would be able to make the time constraints for the job.
Okay, great. All right, any questions or comments from my colleagues? No?
Thank you for volunteering for this board.
Yes, thank you.
And the board provides a really helpful function where people can seek a resolution to a problem without having to go to the courts. And so you do get some challenging issues, and it's very technical work, but we really rely upon the board to give our residents a good way to resolve issues. So anything you'd like to comment on? This week we're voting on for example, a legislation that would allow for a homeowner or a neighbor to appeal a decision about a license for if they wanted to rent their home out like on Airbnb. Well, a neighbor can appeal, or if your license is denied as the owner, you can appeal. And we're proposing that should go to the Board of Appeals rather than to the courts. Any comment on your interest in grappling with those kinds of issues?
That would be very interesting. That's something that I know a lot of municipalities across the country are dealing with, how to address Airbnb and those types of setups. I would have to read, I'm assuming it would be on a case-by-case basis, of course. I don't exactly know how it would impact. I would be most concerned with the value of the property and the neighbors and everything. What you don't want necessarily is a bunch of people shuttling in and out of a house in a residential district. However, at the same time, you do want to have, as the owner of that property, the ability to do with it whatever you want to do. So I guess it would be very interesting to look into it and kind of decide. But again, I guess it would be.
Those are the two.
It's very difficult to balance those things, and if there is no guidance as far as regulations or laws, and we all had to decide upon it, it's going to be a case-by-case basis, I assume, and that's where the, hopefully, knock on wood, consensus comes in.
Thank you so much for that response. Councilmember Joanto.
Thanks again for coming
Do you have
in.
Yes.
your microphone? No.
Thank you for coming in and putting yourself forward. Just two quick questions. You mentioned a little bit, what's your familiarity, if at all, with zoning laws? Have you had any background in that? Talk about that.
Very, very little outside of the residential. And when I say residential, I mean as in I had to build a hand railing in my house, and I had to do it, and I wanted to make sure that it was up to code because of we had to get refinanced and so on and so forth. As far as commercial codes, I used to work for Clark Construction. I don't have the ins and outs of what would be required in Montgomery County, but for those kind of larger projects, we did have to be somewhat familiar, but it would be the project manager that was, knew the ins and outs of it. All that to say, I know somewhat, but I could always learn much more. And I would absolutely be interested in doing that, of course, if I was to sit on this board.
Okay. And one other question. You mentioned your role with the oil and gas company.
Yes.
Is there any business currently that you all are doing in Montgomery County that could become a conflict of interest at some point that you're aware of?
That I'm aware of, no, and in the foreseeable future, also no. I'm not the owner and I'm not one of the executives. However, it is my understanding that we're basically focusing on our business in the district, and that's where we're going to be for the foreseeable future.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Albornoz.
Thank you again, Mr. Cook. So really appreciate your interest. Just curious, how did you hear about the position? How did you hear about the Board of Appeals?
I believe that I was on a listserv, or it might have been next door. And it's something, again, I have a little bit of familiarity with previous community development block grant board that I was on. And I know that there are many boards that you can serve on here in the county. And I think that's one of the best things about the county, that it allows for regular citizens. You don't have to be, it's good if you are, but you don't have to be a doctor or a lawyer or a neurosurgeon or what have you. You can be a person who works for gas stations and contribute to the local government. So, yes, I'm pretty sure, I don't remember which one, but I think it was either Nextdoor or Listserv, one of the two.
Awesome. And then just a general question, interview question. If we brought your colleagues to the table, how do you think they'd describe you?
Ooh, good one. Let's see. I would imagine they would say that I am very serious and very time and task oriented, meaning that if I need to know when something is going to, when we really need to have it. So if we need to have it on Monday, I need to know that information and we will have it on Monday. But if it's just kind of up in the air, it's going to be very difficult for me, and then I have to assign when it's going to happen, and that might be, I have to work on the consensus. Yes.
Okay. Anything else? Thank you so much. I would be remiss if I didn't say HU.
All right, yes,
I just
absolutely.
pretty much signed my last check for my youngest to graduate in May.
Oh, nice.
So it's good to see a fellow Bison here as well.
Absolutely.
All right, well, thank you so much, and we will
Thank
we'll be
you.
in touch.
All right, thank you for the opportunity.
Appreciate you coming today. Okay.
Thank you so much. Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Kosame.
Good morning, Madam Chairman.
Thank you so much for applying to the Board of Appeals. We will begin our questions with just brief introductions. I'm Nancy Navarro. I'm the president of the council, and I also represent District 4. And we'll start with my colleague, Vice President.
And I'm Sidney Katz. Good morning
Yes.
again. We said hello outside.
Yes,
I'm
hi.
the Vice President of the Council, and I represent District 3, which is Rockville, Gaithersburg, all the way down to Leisure World. Thank you for applying.
Thanks very much.
Evan Glass, I'm an at-large member of the council.
Good to meet you.
Good morning, Andrew Friedson, District 1, the southwestern portion of the county, along the Potomac River.
Good to meet you.
Good morning. Gabe Albornoz, I'm an at-large member of the council as well.
Very good.
Good morning. Tom Hucker, and I
Yes.
serve in District 5, which is Tacoma Park up to Burtonsville, the east side of the county.
Thank you, Mr. Hunter.
I'm Hans Reber, at-large.
Yes, Hans, nice to meet you.
Will Jawando, at-large member, good to meet you.
Oh, good to meet you all.
Okay, so we're going to start with some prepared questions, and then I'll open it up for comments or questions from my colleagues and anything that you would like to add when we are wrapping up. So the first question is, why do you want to become a member of the Board of Appeals?
The way I see the Board of Appeal, I would consider like a Supreme Court. That's where the final decisions are made regarding any facilities, any complaint that people may have regarding building codes, educational facilities, or other appeals that may come to the board. As for my reason, I have been an engineer, professional engineer for the last 54 years, as an engineer, as a manager, administrator, been involved with the site selection, design, construction, and operation of various facilities. As you may have seen on my vitae, I was one of the initial members of the National Institute of Engineering Ethics. So I am very particular about ethics and so forth. In addition to that, I was a professor of ethics, graduate level at George Washington University. So with that, I like to offer my experience and services for the board's decision to utilize.
Thank you. I think you've answered question 2 as well. So I'll move over to question 3. Tell
Okay.
us about a time where you have helped to achieve consensus among groups or individuals with different point of views.
Okay, as you may have seen on my resume, I was at Washington Dulles Airport for 22 years during the expansion of the airport. And I was intimately involved with the, again, site selection, design, construction, and eventual operation. The event I'm going to mention, I was heading the Utility Services Division. During the construction, expansion, I would say, we had to relocate 4 6-foot diameter pipes that provide central heating and cooling to various parts of the facility. As such, there were a lot of interests were impacted. The airlines, the retail people, and so forth. So, after 3 days of discussions and presentation and looking at different point of view, we were finally able to select or come up with a suitable solution that serves everybody's interest.
Thank you. Please explain your understanding of the role of the Board of Appeals and how it serves our community.
I would imagine it would be desirable to have consensus from the Board of Appeal because, when you serve a certain need, you consider it and then render a decision. Excuse me. The board should be able to come up with a suitable solution that serve the community without any bias, any predetermined thing. And above all, it's a just decision.
And so do you think that it's more important to reach consensus or have a supermajority in terms of decisions?
Ultimately, it is desirable to have a consensus, but as I discussed a little earlier regarding my incident at the airport, we came with the majority decision. I would think that's the best way to do that.
Are there any potential conflicts of interest of which we should be aware, and will you be able to make the time necessary to serve on this board?
I hope to be able to serve the board if I'm appointed. I do not see any conflict of interest on my part. I was recently appointed by the governor to serve on the Architecture Review Board. They meet monthly on Thursdays, and evidently the board meets on Wednesdays, so I cannot see any conflict. And I will make myself available since I'm in Montgomery County and the board meets here. It's much easier for me to get here even at any particular time if they need to meet.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Kozame. Any questions from my colleagues or comments as follow-ups? No? I think you've been very thorough, so we really appreciate you taking the time to come over, and we will making a decision shortly. We will
Thank you
notify
very, very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for the time to give me. Thank you. Thanks again. And
Thank you very much for your
congratulations on
time.
selection.
Thank you so much. Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Maravilla. Thank you so much for applying to this particular board. We will begin our interview by brief introductions, and then we'll start with some questions and also follow up from my colleagues if there's any.
Thank you.
I'm Nancy Navarro. I'm the president of the Montgomery County Council, as well as I represent District 4 on this council. We'll start with my colleague, Vice President.
Good morning, I'm Sidney Katz, I'm the Vice President of the Council. I represent District 3, which is your district, Rockville, Gaithersburg, all the way down to Leisure World, and thank you for applying.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Evan Glass. I'm an at-large member of the council.
Good morning, Andrew Friedson, District 1, the southwestern portion of the county from Bethesda and Chevy Chase all the way up the river to Poolsville.
Good morning, thanks for applying. Gabe Albornoz, one of the at-large members of the council.
Good morning, I'm Tom Hucker, and I represent District 5 on the east side of the county.
Hans Riemann, one of the at-large members.
Will Ramondo, at-large member.
Nice put name to a face because I get your emails.
Oh, good.
There you go. Now
Thank you for not unsubscribing.
it's really good feedback, huh? Okay, so we'll begin. Generally speaking, then, why do you want to become a member of the Board of Appeals?
Well, service is very important to me, and I have long looked to serve at the county level, and I'm already on the City of Rockville's Board of Appeals, so it seemed a kind of a natural progression to the county level.
Okay. What in your background prepares you to serve on this board?
I've served on the City of Rockville Board of Appeals from 2006 to 2010, and then rejoined early in 2018, this past year. I'm also administrative judge by profession and a mediator, so I have a lot of experience with hearings and taking testimony and making factual determinations. And most importantly, one of the things I do enjoy about being on a board is working with my colleagues to achieve consensus results, or even the ability to listen to each other and learn so much from other people's positions and points of view.
Tell us about a time where you have helped to achieve consensus among groups or individuals with differing points of view.
One experience I had actually was the City of Rockville Board of Appeals, and it still stands out to me because it was a very interesting case. So it was an enforcement action from a special exception. The issue was the special exception holder had a requirement to maintain the forest next to their gas station convenience store. And what happened was, in the pruning of those trees, they had hired an arborist that didn't quite know how to prune, and the trees were dying. So we had the forestry department bring an action asking for them to basically reforest the whole thing with full trees. We had, on the other hand, a small business owner where it would be very cost prohibitive and hurt, financially, to do it at that level. And the situation we were faced with from the parties was sort of an all or nothing of, well, from the small business owner, let's just wait and see, and hopefully nothing happens to the trees. From the forest department, let's reforest the whole thing with full trees. Even the board kind of initially was a little, uncertain how to proceed. Two of us were a little more, were particularly sensitive to the forestation needs and the environmental issues. Another member was particularly concerned with the small business interests. So rather than just vote this is how we see it, this is what we want, or this is how we think it should come out, we took the time to really listen to the testimony, asked a lot of questions to the small business owner, asked a lot of technical questions to the forest department, and ultimately what we came to, which seemed to satisfy both parties, was a compromise whereby the worst trees could be reforested by saplings, so much less expensive, and taking care of the trees that were already gone, and then take a wait-and-see approach on the remainder with sort of a similar kind of solution. So I don't know quite how it turned out in the long term, but we sort of crafted a solution that was acceptable to all the parties.
In your opinion, is it more important for the board to reach its decisions by consensus or by simple majority? I think you described this example very well, but in general, what would you think? What would you say?
Actually, I would give a third, I'm sorry.
Okay, okay.
Sorry. I would actually give a third one, collegiality. The most important thing to the board is the collegiality of its members for when the board doesn't reach a consensus. So I think it's healthy for any kind of quasi-judicial or judicial body that sits as a membership to have differences of experience, differences of opinions, different passions, and different viewpoints. I think that helps make for very healthy and well thought out decisions. Occasionally, I think you will get 2-to-1 majorities, or in the case of the board, 3-to-5, 3-to-2. Mm-hmm. And what's important is that everyone's heard, that we have tremendous respect for each other and each other's viewpoints. And once a decision is made, even if you're in the dissent, you're quite accepting of the rule. And I should know I've been in the dissent many times.
Are there any potential conflicts of interest of which we should be aware, and will you be able to make the time commitment required for service on the board?
No conflicts of interest I'm aware of, unless there's potential overlapping the city board and the county board. And time commitment, I have a flex schedule, so if I were to receive an offer, it would have to be worked out between the board and my office.
And I think that, our attorneys are going to look into this issue of potential conflict. If for some reason we would select you,
Okay.
we first need to figure that out as well. Really appreciate taking the time. Council Vice President Katz.
Thank you very much, and again, thank you for applying. So if you were selected for this board, you were thinking to stay on the Rockville City Board, or are you going to resign from the Rockville City Board?
I think the answer would be at this point, I don't know, because I enjoy being on the board. It's a very collegial group and very interesting cases. On the other hand, if there was a conflict of interest, then I would likely resign from the Rockville Board.
And just, do you receive any kind of stipend or anything from the Rockville Board?
No, I don't.
You don't? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. I think we would need to know, maybe you can let us know as a follow-up, we would need to know if we were to choose you, that you would serve. I guess, leaving it ambiguous as to whether you would continue to serve on the Rockville or maybe not accept the offer from us, somehow it isn't quite, a little less than satisfactory. So you don't have to declare in this moment, but I think we need to hear from you.
Actually, I understand. I would think the bigger thing would be working out the time commitment for schedule, because like I said, I have a flex schedule at work. So
I'm not sure that I have any problem with you being on both. I don't know.
Oh, no, I was talking about my full-time employment
Yeah.
for meetings. So that was something that have to be worked out. In terms of the two boards, I wouldn't have a problem resigning from the City of Rockville Board for a conflict of interest issue, or even if it came to, or even as a precautionary, even if without a legal determination, I probably would lean that way anyway, just knowing the nature of the appeals for the Rockville, and hopefully no one at Rockville's watching.
Well,
I'm kidding.
again, I'll say, I can't imagine why there's exactly a conflict, but I'll hear what people have to say. I mean, there are some limitations on how many commissions and things like that, but they're not overlapping, they're parallel.
Well, it's something that we're going to just look into because it was brought up previously, so. Yes, Councilmember Joanda.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation and the very extensive vitae that you sent here. You're putting many of us to shame with your scholarship. I did have a question. Could you talk a little bit about what you've done in the community as far as community groups, civic participation outside of the Rockville Board of Appeals process? Could you talk a little bit about that?
More, it's been kind of some pro bono legal work when I was with a firm, some sort of volunteer activities in the legal community that I've been looking into. Service a lot in the, I would say, bar associations would be larger. Within the community, it's pretty much been the City of Rockville Board of Appeals.
That's your main.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Well, Mr. Maria, thank you so much for coming over, and very impressive resume and background.
Well, thank you.
Really appreciate your service, and we will be in touch very shortly.
Well, thank you so much for having me
Thank
and
you.
taking the time to see me today.
Absolutely.
Have a good day. Yeah. Very nice to meet you, Mr. Roberts. Thanks a lot.
Okay, great. So Megan, we will be circling back with everybody to find out if, so Megan will be in touch with everybody, so we can hopefully make a decision regarding this very, very soon. Okay, thank you. Gentlemen, we're going to start. This is our January 22nd council legislative session, and we will begin with a moment of silence. If you can stand, please do so. Thank you. So now on to general business announcements. Ms. Lamarcy.
Thank you. Good morning. The council is seeking applicants for the Public Election Fund Committee. Application deadline is February 6th of 2019 at 5 p.m. The council is also seeking applicants for the Charter Review Commission. Application deadline for that is February 27th, 2019 at 5 p.m. No petitions were received this week.
Thank you. And the minutes for December 7th and 11th have been distributed in advance to all council members. Are there any corrections? Hearing none, those are approved. We also have the minutes of the closed session from December 11th, 2018. Are there any corrections to that? Thank you. So those are approved. Now we have consent calendar, item number 5. Is there?
The consent calendar.
Okay, it's been moved by Councilmember Reamer.
I'll second it.
Second by Vice President Katz and Councilmember Reamer. Councilmember Reamer, you have your light on? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Council President Navarro. Wanted to just briefly comment on item C, which is the resolution to establish a Remembrance and Reconciliation Commission. I appreciate the work that I've done with Councilmember Jawando, and Councilmember Rice would also be a lead sponsor. He is out of the country and did get back to me in time to let me know, but not in time for this agenda. So let the record note that he is also a co-lead sponsor, and thanks to the co-sponsors here. And we are joined today in the audience by several residents or activists who are working hard on this issue. Tony Cohen with the Button Farm Minari Foundation, and Will Schwartz with the Maryland Lynching Project. And hopefully soon we'll have the arrival of Director Jim Stowe from the Office of Human Rights. The goal of this initiative is to support the community dialogue and bring the agencies together in a way that is necessary to support the county's participation in the Equal Justice Institute's Memorial Project. The Equal Justice Institute, founded by Brian Stevenson, has a foundation in Montgomery, Alabama, that is dedicated to bringing forward the history of America's struggle with racism, slavery, segregation, lynching, racial terrorism, and bringing that dialogue forward to achieve reconciliation and understanding. And I'm interested in this for many, many reasons, but I just thought I would share a little bit of the context from my vantage, which is to say that I think America has never owned up to its history. And when you hear Brian Stevenson talk, he will describe how he's traveled in Germany, and after World War II, that country went through a process to own up to what it had done and to repudiate what had happened as a result of that country's actions. And as a result of that process, if you go to Germany, according to Brian Stevenson, there are no memorials to the Nazi Party. There are no places where the bravery of, Nazi soldiers are extolled, or the actions of that regime are held up as an example. America never did that after the Civil War. And in fact, we took a different path, and we're still reeling, I think, from the consequences of our failed efforts at Reconstruction. I'll never forget, as a young child, my best friend's family, they had a picture of Robert E. Lee on the wall. And I didn't know who that was, or I'd heard a little bit about the Civil War, but from the age of 4 or 5, it was conveyed to me that Robert E. Lee was a person suitable to hang a portrait of on your wall, and that his actions leading the War of the Rebellion were, acceptable in polite company. And that I'm sure had a consequence, but that kind of learning is an experience that people in this country have over and over and over. And you'll still see it, in places where they should not be, memorializations to the Confederacy. I thought a lot about that when I visited the Gettysburg battlefield. You'll see it here in Maryland at at our battlefields, memorials to the Confederacy. And of course, you'll see it, you would have seen it very recently right across the street. We had until very recently a statue to the Confederacy right here in Rockville. I was recently reading the autobiography of Ulysses S. Grant, and at the end there is an appendix describing how the effort around reconciliation devolved into an agreement, a peace among whites that left blacks behind, and how the understanding of Grant was changed over time to view him as a failed president, as someone afflicted by corruption, and as a drunk. And that's part of the rewriting of history and the changing of memory of the post-Civil War era. And it was Frederick Douglass who said that what is happening now is a peace among whites that has left behind blacks. So we have to, I think, go back and understand that history and see how slavery led to segregation and Jim Crow, which has led to incarceration, and feel the urgency of addressing the problems today of equity and incarceration and poverty, and do what was never done generations ago and try to achieve some kind of community dialogue and recognition. And that's the big ambition of the Montgomery, Alabama's Equal Justice Institute and the dialogue that it seeks to foster. So with the resolution, the Office of Human Rights Director Stowe will provide staff support to a commission that will bring together not only our schools and our Arts and Humanities Commission and our college and our county government, but also community leaders, activists from many walks of life to create that community dialogue and to help us understand and achieve remembrance and reconciliation. And ultimately, and it may take years for this to happen, it would result in, if we are successful, bringing a memorial that is part of the museum in Montgomery right here to Montgomery County. There were at least three lynchings in Montgomery County, and in 2 of the instances, the victim was abducted from the county jail, which was probably right here on the property of this county office complex, this Montgomery County Council office complex. And the men who were taken from here were lynched nearby, proximate to Rockville. And another one happened in the Poolsville area. So, we'll be learning more about that through the process of hopefully locating the locations, identifying markers, taking soil samples, and then interacting with the foundation. So that is what the effort here. We're just beginning this, and it will be a multi-year effort, and it will take time, but it is important work. And again, I want to thank my colleagues for their support and the community leaders for helping to make this happen.
Thank you, Councilmember Reamer. I'd like to be added as a co-sponsor and really do applaud this effort. I think it really fits very well with the commitment that we have made as a council to work towards equity and racial justice. And so, there's so many different elements that go into this work, and I'm really proud and excited to be part of a council that has decided to take this head on as we do our work. With that, Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Council President, and thank you, Hans, for working together with me on this and for your leadership on this effort. And I also want to thank the Council President for her work in pushing us all towards a racial equity lens. I think we're going to serve as a model for the nation and for surrounding jurisdictions. So thank you. Yesterday, I just want to make a couple of brief remarks as the co-lead sponsor for this resolution. Yesterday, we celebrated and commemorated Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday with a great day of service and inspiration. I myself went to about 5 events across the county, and it was just a great time. People from all races and faiths and ethnicities and backgrounds were together serving our community and having what we call a day on, not a day off, and it was a great day. But I think one of the things that often is forgotten when we celebrate Dr. King is that he was a victim of this domestic terrorism that has its roots in hatred of racism, and he was killed. He was assassinated in part of that, and he was murdered. And so the day after we celebrate, in a day that's very rightfully so, commemorating his legacy of service and importance, as Hans mentioned, in many parts of the country, we memorialize the people that either advocated for or participated in these horrible acts of terrorism against African Americans. But we do not memorialize or remember the victims. We have a specific name for this type of systematic domestic terrorism and murder of African Americans. One of the most heinous forms of it is called lynching. But I think that word falls short of conveying the sheer brutality, the terror, the grotesque and violent nature of these public murders. This is a horrific reality of our shared history as Americans, one that we need to remember. This summer, in fact, is going to mark the 400th year anniversary of the beginning of slavery here in America, when slaves were first recorded in Jamestown, Virginia. I will be offering a resolution to call on Montgomery County to do everything we can to acknowledge this legacy of slavery in the country, and making sure that we remember the past so that we can prevent future atrocities, and calling on all our communities to come together as collective identity as Americans. I believe it's only by facing our past and identifying the roots of hatred and civil divisiveness do we have any hope of a future for peace and unity and prosperity. I want to thank again President Navarro. I want to thank the many, many people in the room who will be involved in this commission in making sure this history gets shared with all of our residents and children and community members. And I want to also say that I think it's important that we call out the names of these individuals that we know about here in the county that were killed. Hans alluded to them. George W. Peck, John Diggs, and Sidney Randolph were the 3 men that we have recorded being murdered before public crowds right here in Montgomery County. And while we remember Dr. King yesterday, I think it's important we remember their names as well. We cannot mask this history if we're going to move past it. And knowing who they are and what they contributed and what happened to them is an important part of that history. So again, as we remember the names of George Peck, John Diggs, and Sidney Randolph, we acknowledge our past history of discrimination and murder here in the county and in the nation. And hopefully this resolution and this process will help us bring us on a much needed journey of reconciliation and peace in the future. So thank you again, Hans. It's great to work with you on it.
Thank you. Councilmember Hucker.
Thank you, Council President. I'm grateful to both of you for your leadership on this. I had asked to be added as a co-sponsor as well. Thank you.
Councilmember Glass?
I think my colleagues have said everything that needs to be said about the importance of this, and I too would like to be a co-sponsor to this commission.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson?
Thank you, Council President. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor. Appreciate being able to work with the two of you and your leadership on this issue. I think it's important that we can't be serious about charting our course for the future unless we're honest about our past. And so I think this is an important way to do it. I did want to switch gears quickly and just we have Bethesda Urban Partnership is on this, and I was just hoping to very quickly mention my appreciation for Bethesda Urban Partnership as a resident of Bethesda and as the district council member who represents Bethesda. Very excited and proud to be renewing this partnership that we have with county government. Rick is here in the audience, who does a great job running it with a tremendous staff. We talked at considerable length at our last Fed committee meeting about this, and I talked in considerable more detail, but just two things that I wanted to note in terms of my appreciation as both a resident and the district council representative. One is that over the course of the current term that we're on the consent calendar going to renew, Bethesda Urban Partnership has gotten a 20% increase in outside funds. And I joked at the Fed committee meeting that I don't want to know what percentage of that are my tickets from the Taste of Bethesda, but I'm sure that is quite a few. But it's a tremendous opportunity to leverage the county and to provide tremendous local public amenities and local public services at a cost-effective way. And then non-auto mode transportation, the increase of non-auto driver mode share is up 42% in the last 5 years, which is just a tremendous increase and is where the county is headed. And Bethesda, and under the leadership and support of Bethesda Urban Partnership, has really been a leader on this issue of working with workers and residents and local businesses in order to get us out of our reliance on cars and get us walking to, taking transit to, biking to work. And so I just appreciate that leadership, and I just wanted to make sure that we noted that. So thank you.
Councilmember Albornoz?
I'd like to be listed as a co-sponsor as well, Councilmember Rebar and Councilmember Jawando's bill. And also don't want to miss this opportunity to acknowledge our Office of Human Rights that does outstanding work in our community on so many different levels. Director Stowe does it on a wing and a prayer because their resources are short, but I see him walking in now and want to acknowledge the incredible work of our Office of Human Rights, the fantastic MLK Day event that they put together yesterday, and am so excited about their continued leadership and important role in carrying forward this bill. Thank you.
Council Vice President Katz?
Thank you very much, and Council President. I just wanted to note that I am a co-sponsor and very proud to be so, but I also am a person who's a student of history, especially Montgomery County history. And what you're discussing is extremely important. We should not forget the horrible part of our history as well as the part of history that we're proud of. So we need to do both, and I appreciate the thoughts.
Director Stowe, would you like to make some brief remarks regarding this very important introduction? Yes, if you'd like to come forward, I believe that we have a microphone. Oh, you can just, yeah. This microphone would work.
I think it's on now. Very good.
Sounds good.
First of all, Madam President, members of council, thank you so much for your participation in certainly last night's event, MLK holiday, but we're here to talk about this morning a very special initiative, the Equal Justice Initiative. And to Councilmember Reamer, thank you for your leadership in this. It's extremely important that we have to understand and realize that this issue of history is sometimes very difficult. It is truth sometimes that allows us to really move forward, even when we have most difficult conversations about that history. It is our hope then that with this resolution that we're able then to put together a team of folks to look at Montgomery County's history critically, honestly, right, fourthly. That we not only tell the story, but we learn from the lessons of the story. And that's what the Equal Justice Initiative really is all about. It's reconciliation. How do we move from where we were to where we need to be as a community and as a nation? So we're hopeful that with this new plan commission, that persons of goodwill from all across the broad breadth of this community might come together and have some serious conversations, some frank conversations, some honest conversations about how we might tell the story of at least 3 persons who were brutally killed. And I say killed is really the correct term here in Montgomery County for deeds that they may or may not have done. We don't know. But at the end of the day, at least they were unjust. And so to tell that story in a way that's appropriate, to tell that story in a way that is accurate, and to tell that story in a way that is unfiltered, because that's the other thing about history, make sure we're real clear about. That's to say this, is that in whose voice that history is told is critically important. And so we're hopeful that we put this together, that our black community might also take a chief role in telling this story, because while it is all of our story, it originates obviously with those of us who are black in this community. And so hopefully as we put all this together, all these dynamics I'm talking about, we'll be able to manage and hopefully produce for all of you in this great community of ours that history in ways that are real, in ways that are revealing, in ways that are honest, in ways that are just. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for all your work. Wonderful. So now we are going to move on to a briefing. This is a briefing on our fiscal plan expenditure overview. I'm sorry, did I skip somebody? I'm sorry, we so excited about the commission, I forgot to vote on the consent calendar. All those in favor of adopting the consent calendar, please raise your hand. It is unanimous. Thank you. So now we can move over to this very important conversation. And for this conversation, we have Ms. Marlene Michelson, who's the Executive Director for the Council Staff, Aaron Tromka, Senior Legislative Analyst for OLO. We have Gene Smith, Legislative Analyst as well, and I know it's listed here that Craig Howard hopefully will be joining us. So every year, we do have a briefing on our fiscal plan. This is pretty much a blueprint where we take a look at where we are, but it is really a point-in-time discussion, and it is something that we have done in order to be very disciplined regarding where we're headed with our expenditures, our revenue, have a sense of how we're doing, and of course, always being very mindful of the fiscal indicators and the promises that we have made as a county to achieve particular targets. This particular time, I had conversations with Mr. Smith and Ms. Michelson about, given that this is a, new council in many ways, and we're kind of entering a new era of leadership in the county, I think it's important for us to also have a conversation about our fiscal plan and expenditures, but put it into context, because many times these numbers and these charts, et cetera, are very static. And of course, there are moments where we all kind of, are a bit shocked about something that we see, or maybe very excited about something that we see. But if we don't have this in context, then it's very difficult for us to do, in my opinion, our job when it comes to making those very important decisions of spending affordability guidelines, or what are we going to do regarding respecting our, promise to achieve our reserve goal of 10% by 2020, or whenever our CIP comes over or our operating budget comes over. I think it's so important to have all of this in the back of our minds, because we will get into a lot of very busy work, and we will be looking at things individually. But this is really part of a larger picture. And it also, I think, informs us whenever we are asked about, the economic outlook for Montgomery County and this whole comparison with a certain county in Virginia. And what does that mean? Well, the reality is that we also have to accept that Montgomery County residents expect a particular level of services, and also that we ascribe to certain values. And that has a cost. That doesn't come for free. And so it is, I think, critical that every time we talk about a fiscal plan or the outlook, et cetera, that we put sort of the face behind it to understand why we're headed. And of course, we will all have to make decisions and explain those. But having this context, in my opinion, is really important. So I really appreciate the work that has taken place to get us here. It's the first time that we're doing it this way. But I hope that this becomes a tradition so that we can, in my opinion, have a particular understanding and just a different perspective every time we deal with these issues. So with that, who will begin? Ms. Michelson?
Yes, I'm going to briefly introduce this and then turn it over to Jean and Aaron. I wanted to let the council know that we pulled together a team of analysts who will be working on overview and big picture fiscal issues and operating budget issues. That team includes Jacob Sesker, Linda McMillan, Craig Howard, Linda Price, and the three of us. And we worked together at the council president's request to say, at this unique point in time with the new council, how can we help provide some context for you, both background of some key decisions that have been made, as well as looking forward what we think are some of the key issues that you need to understand to deal with the many fiscal issues that you need to make decisions on. So our purpose today is to give you some background and information from fiscal plan updates, spending affordability, and some previous studies and reports that went to the last council about the cost drivers for government and key things you need to understand. And some of the things we will be discussing today are residents' needs and expectations, some demographic trends, economic indicators, and a number of different points in time at which you need to make decisions. And one of the useful things in this packet that I want to refer you to is on page 5, which has a list of all the key points and times at which the council needs to make decisions, receives briefings, and gets additional reports. And we did this because we feel like a lot of information is coming to you, and we wanted to make sure you understood the full range of points and times at which you will be asked to weigh in. Before I turn this over to Jean, I did want to note and thank Craig Howard, who really took the lead in writing the memo before you and the PowerPoint. He unfortunately could not be here today, so we're taking over on the presentation, but he deserves much of the credit for the written materials you see. So,
before we turn, let me let me really acknowledge and express my appreciation for that chart on page 5. I think for those of us who've been here, this is a great refresher. For you council members, this is a really awesome guide that is very helpful, because I don't think we've had it like this before. So really, thank you so much.
We did this so we could keep track as well.
Awesome. Decided to share with us.
I did want to start out, before we get into some of the fiscal thing, with reiterating what the council president said, which is an important part of our context here is the expectations of our citizens, who are used to very high caliber services and want to see that continue. In some other governments during fiscal crises, it may be acceptable to say we're pulling way back on services. That is not what the residents of our county want to see. They want us to be fiscally prudent, but still have a high-quality school system and many of the other services that they are used to seeing. And in fact, 4 out of 5 county residents in a 2017 survey gave the county an excellent or good rating as a place to live and based on quality of life. And they want the county to continue to invest in these services and continue to make keep the same level of services and make further improvements to things like traffic, crime, public schools, affordable housing, and social services. So that context and that background is, I think, what leads the council to make many of the decisions it does.
Well, as we talked about this morning, history is important. So we're going to quickly look at some of the demographic changes that have occurred over the last 15 years in Montgomery County. We chose this range primarily because it kind of has equal trends along the economic growth development as opposed to a high point and a low point. So you see in this slide, I mean, the county is growing, but not evenly. So both the county population is growing, but as you can see in the second row of population age 60 plus is growing faster. And we can also see that the school enrollment for K through 12 is growing faster. So again, the county is growing, but not evenly. Equally, for economic indicators, the county's wealth is growing. Both the per capita income and the household income and accessible tax base are increasing. Again, not evenly. We can see that the poverty rate of population is increasing as well as students receiving free and reduced meals. So again, the takeaway here is that, again, the county is growing in wealth, and again, the economy is doing well, but it's not even. So as Marlene said, we were going to show a couple slides related to past decision the council has made. So during the recession, the council had to take extraordinary actions to make up shortfalls, and those actions included cutting personnel costs, furloughs, changes to group insurance rates, and retirement contributions, as well as reduction to services. Particularly libraries and recreation took hard cuts during that time period, and to ensure that the county's fiscal picture was in order. However, coming out of the Great Recession, the council also took extraordinary actions to ensure that those services were returned, so that all service needs were addressed, even though we took cuts during the Great Recession. And in a minute, we're going to get to the revenue and expenditure picture, but we also will talk that the county has, or the council has limited ability in its tax room to handle additional services. So as much discussed during the past council during fiscal 17 and how to address the class size issue with MCPS, the council decided to increase property taxes and recordation taxes to address that issue. And in this chart, we can see that the class size has been reduced through that increase. I will note, as Craig Howard gave me notes for this, that this is the average across the school system. So clearly individual parents or students might not see this in their particular class. But again, the fiscal 17 property tax increase did address the class size need by reducing class sizes across the board. And as well, the recordation tax increase has provided at least $27 million on average in the capital budget for expanding schools for the capital school budget. So again, both the council's decisions for property tax increase and recordation tax increase has addressed needs that the council believed were of utmost importance during that time.
A quick question, Jean.
Yep.
Can you go back to the slide regarding the the recession decisions we made? We rebased the school system's budget, but that's not on here, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the biggest, most difficult decisions we made.
Yes, that is correct. At the very onset of the recession, absolutely.
Correct, and that, I think, it's definitely one of the main reasons why, when faced with the recommendation from the executive to increase property tax and recordation, and then we decided about the recordation tax, it really had a lot to do with the fact that we had to make that decision, and the school student enrollment was just, the projections kept, growing and growing and growing, and we felt this was a very important moment then to try to address that particular decision. It was really driven by the fact that the school enrollment, the projections were just way off, and so it was a very important moment to address that. But I just want to make sure my colleagues know that this was a very important and very difficult decision, but if we had not done that, we would not have been able to get ourselves back in a trajectory that we did.
Thank you. So now we're going to talk a little bit briefly about our revenue, how county receives revenues and what percentages of that come from certain areas. Some of this will feel like Revenue 101, but I think it's important in setting how we then allocate expenditures later on. So the approved fiscal 19 tax supported budget is close to $4.9 billion. Of that, 37% is from property taxes. And you'll see that the way we're going to do this is we're going to look at each revenue source and have a quick note about how that revenue source works. So for property taxes, this is a very stable revenue source, but it is constrained by inflation through the charter limit. And unless this council is in unanimous approval of going above the charter limit, property taxes can only go up by inflation each year. And that's, again, part of the reason why, given other constraints in the budget, the council decided to increase property taxes in fiscal 17. And as we discussed in December, this rate can, or the amount the county receives can fluctuate year to year from the estimate just based on a couple things: tax credits awarded, assessed values coming in a little lower than expected, and delinquent accounts, although that accounts for a very small portion of it. So the next largest chunk of the county's revenue comes from income tax. This one, the state collects the tax for us and then distributes it to the counties, which makes it slightly difficult to always understand where we're at. We have to wait for those distributions to come in. Unlike property taxes, this is a volatile revenue source, primarily due to the capital gains. We have to wait to see where those come in, and a few household can fluctuate large portions of that. And of course, we're constrained by the state law. We cannot go higher than 3.2%. We're at 3.2%. So ability to raise additional income or revenue from the income tax is challenging. And this is also demonstrates the fluctuations that occur primarily due to capital gains. And as you can see, when we are unable to meet our estimates, we have to make changes in course sometimes, and other times we receive more than expected. So federal and state aid is not a tax, it's just the aid we receive. 80% of this to 90% of this is the school aid that the county receives. And we'll talk about that a lot during the state legislation sessions from January to April. But the council has very little control over this, but it does make up 18% of the revenues we receive each year. The energy tax makes up the next portion. This is the third largest tax revenue source for the county. It's very broad-based. It reaches institutions and organizations that don't normally pay income or property tax. However, it's volatile. It's based on weather, energy use, as well as the council's decision in terms of where the rates are set each year. Recordation and transfer tax. I will note that this is only, there are 3 tiers to the recordation and transfer tax. This is only the one that goes to the operating budget. The rest that goes to the capital budget is not included in this because we're looking at the operating budget. Accounts for 3% of the tax revenue that we receive, or 3% of the revenues we receive each year in fiscal 19. And of course, this is volatile. It's dependent on sales. It's also dependent on the number of commercial buildings that sell each year or don't sell, is where we see the fluctuation. And then finally, there is 6% that's to other taxes and other revenue sources, very minor in terms of total revenue received, and also very little ability to expand the tax base there, given how those taxes work. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron, who's going to continue the presentation with expenditures.
So what Gene showed you, Gina showed you where the dollars come in. Now we're going to talk about where the dollars go out. You know, often you'll hear people say, well, in a $5 billion budget, you should be able to find room for such and such. We want to show you how that $5 billion budget is actually a lot smaller in terms of your discretion and your flexibility. So the pie on the chart, on the slide here is looking at FY19. The largest piece of the pie is what Gene just talked about, the new revenues. We've also included in that sliver on the top the portion of the reserves that are carried over from FY18, about $488 million. We also included in this net transfers from other funds, most notably from liquor control. And so we start with a pie that's pretty darn large, $5.4 billion. But as I said, your ability to spend this is much more limited. We're going to start reducing this pie with this slice, and these are the fiscal and policy commitments. These are things that we have policies or other commitments that require us to spend or to put aside money for things like preserving and adding to our reserves in order to get to our 10% goal. The PAYGO and current revenue, the dollars that go for capital projects in order to reduce the amount that we have to borrow through debt, and we'll talk about debt more in a minute. And also commitments we've made for past service of county employees, the OPEB for all county agencies, and in this slide, the county government's portion of pension and retirement obligations. So a pie that started at $5.4 billion is now down to $4.6 billion. The next slice, as we said, is debt service, paying off the bonds for capital projects going back up to 20 years. It also includes short and long-term leases. You'll often hear us say that debt is the third largest agency in county government. What that means is after the schools and after the county government comes debt service, even more than we spend on park and planning, even more than we spend on the college. Now, recent council decisions have slowed the growth of borrowing, and you'll be seeing that, and you'll be discussing that more in upcoming work sessions on the CIP and SAG. But meanwhile, now our scorecard is down to $4.2 billion. As Jean mentioned, a good portion comes of the money comes from federal and state aid, but those dollars are earmarked for defined uses. You really have no discretion to redirect those dollars elsewhere. The pie is now down to $3.3 billion. And then a very, very large slice for the school system's maintenance of efforts. As you're familiar, maintenance of effort, or MOE, says that we must minimally spend the same amount per student from one year to the next. And so as enrollment grows, as it has for the past decade in MCPS, so do our MOE dollars. And as also you're probably familiar with, there's now a shift of some of the pension costs, the normal costs of pensions for the teachers, that now come out of the MCPS budget. So now this pie is down to about $1.6 million remaining. The college also has an MOE law. It's a little bit different than from MCPS. Rather than being enrollment-based, it's a dollar amount from one year to the next. And also, as Jean mentioned, there are tuition dollars that come in, but those must be spent. They're earmarked for college use. So after all of this, about 1/4 of the pie remains. Now, you might think, okay, this is our discretionary portion of the budget. But really, it's only in that sense, and that's the part that's not earmarked. But you still have little flexibility even in this last quarter if you want to continue the same services and programs. So let me remind you, in this pie, that includes the base budget, most of the base budget for the county government and park and planning. So this includes things like police, DHHS, parks, DEP, DOT, and all the other county government and park and planning functions. Also, if any room that needs to be made to fund the educational institutions, MCPS or the college above MOE, that comes from this slide. And finally, any compensation costs increases, adding new positions, pay raises, also likely would come from this segment. So there's a lot going on there, and there's a lot of competition for this last quarter of the pie. I mentioned compensation costs. I just want to very briefly show you some of the takeaways from a presentation that Craig and I had given to the council back in November about personnel costs. As many of you know, personnel costs, both wages and benefits, comprise about 80% of all tax-supported spending. What we found was that for the Montgomery County government, if you look at the years from FY14 to FY19, we were able to cover compensation costs of about 5% per employee per year, but that will only fit because of tax rate increases, the FY17 tax increase, and really some unprecedented reductions in retirement costs. And we'll be getting into that later in other presentations. We also looked forward and saw that the revenue growth in the fiscal plan is about 2.7% a year, and we contrasted that with the rate of past compensation growth and found that absent any continued reduction in retirement costs, it'll be really hard to fit in those current trends moving forward. So up to now, the three of us have given you sort of a high-level picture of the decisions that are going to take place over the next few months. We want to just take one more minute to discuss something that's going to play out immediately, and that's the budget savings plan. And we want to give you just a high-level graphic presentation of what's going on here. So on this slide, the top bar represents the budgeted resources. This is what we started with back when we started the budget in the beginning of the fiscal year. It includes the reserves carried over from FY18 over to the left, and then we added on the new revenues, everything that Jean discussed. So the top bar is what dollars we thought we had available to plan. The bottom bar is our planned use of resources, preserving and growing the reserves consistent with our county policy, and then all the dollars available for the agencies to serve public needs. This budget was approved in May, took effect in July 1, but what's important to understand is the books don't close until much later into the fiscal year. And when the books closed, this is what happened. We found that there were about $46 million less in the carryover from FY18 to 19, which created the gap. That's what's resulting in the need to reduce expenditures. And the intent is that the savings from these expenditures go through the reduced spending to fill in the gap. Turn it back to Marlene to conclude.
Finally, just as a wrap-up, some of the key points that we're hoping you'll take from today. First, as we indicated, our residents are expecting a very high quality of service, and we have significant demographic changes that are going to affect how we deliver those services and what services are needed. Second, as you are well aware, there have been dramatic shifts in the economy over the past 15 years, and those have really impacted our ability to fund existing services and meet demand for our changing services. The county has very little tax room and thus very limited flexibility to address pressures by increasing demand. And finally, as Aaron displayed with the pie, a lot of our existing commitments take up a large portion of the pie. There's very little flexibility left to make decisions regarding new programs, increases in compensation, or any changes. And with that, we welcome your questions.
Thank you so much. I think this is a great, overview. I think it's also very timely. I just want to remind my colleagues, and of course, as chair of the GO committee, with amazing council members who comprise that committee, Council Vice President Katz and Councilmember Friedson, we have worked very hard to keep up with our commitments, and I think, Council Member Reamer, who was just president, understands very clearly when you go up to the rating agency what this is. There's a story behind all of this. There's a narrative behind all of this. And so I think you will hear very soon a lot of talk about our reserve goals. And, why don't you just take it down to, 5% and things of that nature. And in the same breath, those conversations then say, hey, and, Comptroller Francho has talked about being very careful because we may be facing a, mild recession soon. And so it's totally contradictory. The bottom line is that, we learned our lesson very clearly during the recession. It was a global recession. It was very difficult. And we made that commitment to this 10%, which, of course, people are going to say different things, but the reality is that that's not even what we should aspire to. It is what we have committed to do. And so we're very close to doing that. And I feel very strongly that we have to continue on that path, especially if we know, and we've seen it with these very volatile indicators, that, if we ever to hit another or experience another recession of sorts, it is very important to have that reserve level at least at 10%. And once we reach that, we will have then the ability to have some flexibility with some other revenues. But it's very important to remember that. And I know there's a lot of conversation right now out there with some reports that have come out. I hope that my colleagues understand that it has not been easy to get to this level, and we're almost there, and we should at least be very respectful of that. So anyway, with that, let me turn it over to Council Vice President Katz.
Thank you very much, Madam President. First off, and I want to get back to the reserves also, but do we have a figure of how many seniors live here under the poverty level? Do we actually have a figure for that one? We had it for other people.
We're going to have to look into that. I don't have it with me right now. You're asking for seniors under the poverty level?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would be interested to know that. Thank you. And getting back to the reserves, and first off, thank you very much for a thorough report. You do an excellent job, and you've done it once again this morning. But what is the current percentage of the reserves that we now have? I know that from the difference between 6% and 10% was $212.2 million, but what is it that we're at right now?
I believe the fiscal plan that came out in December showed 9.4%, and we're projected to try to make it to 10% by fiscal 20.
So, and those who say, well, you should spend your savings, I don't know that that's always a good suggestion, but those who say that we should be spending our savings, and they cite, I believe, other places throughout the country that have lower percentages of reserves and those types of reserves, Do the other places that have the lower reserves have the AAA bond rating as we do? Do you know?
I'm going to turn because I believe we have Alex Espinosa, Director of Finance, who will have that information.
You're going to do a lifeline here? Is that what you're going to do? Call in
Call in a favor.
Yeah. That's one of those quiz shows. Yeah, I've seen that, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Katz. So what we look at are jurisdictions that are like us, are also AAA rated, generally around the same population, about 900,000. And within that peer group comparison, what we've found through the work of our FA, financial advisor, is that we are generally slightly below median in terms of our reserves compared to theirs. And that's been a consistent trend the last few years, which is why, it's going to help us as we trend towards and meet our 10% goal. That's going to put us more in line with that peer group.
Thank you for that. And then the other point on this is if we're at 9.4, and so we need the slight additional amount. Once we get to that, then we have that much more monies that we could be using for other things, and maybe we should even have a reserve for that when we have the setbacks from that we didn't get all the monies that we thought we were going to have, that we then could borrow from ourselves on that rather than try to borrow from these reserves. To me, it's always easy to say spend the money that's there, but there's a reason that the money is there, and we have to be very, very careful about what we're doing. So I appreciate your thoughts and your efforts, and all of this is important work, and we have to continue to do it. And I just want to take the moment to applaud. I'm on the Government Operations Committee, but I just want to take a moment to applaud the council president, who's the chair of that, because she too has realized, just like we all have, that debt is a great concern for Montgomery County. You said it again, and I say it all the time, that it's the third largest. If it were a department, it is not, but if it were a department, it'd be the third largest department that Montgomery County has. It will engulf us unless we are careful, and I know that we're being extremely careful under leadership, and so we will get there. But anyhow, thank you for all your work.
And if I could just add, Councilmember Katz, you made a very important point, which is once we reach targets on both reserve and OPEB, it frees dollars we would otherwise have to be spending on an ongoing basis to support those services. And so right now, and by the way, Aaron and Craig are finalizing a report on OPEB, which I think the council is going to really appreciate. But while we're trying to build up those reserves and we haven't hit the mark on OPEB in particular, every year we are paying out-of-pocket costs which otherwise could be used for services. So that's a very important point.
Because I'm the only woman on the council, I just need to say that actually I'm the one who said that at the very beginning, but anyway. Okay, Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Madam President. Great presentation. The scars from that time may not be visible, but I still feel them. It was obviously an unprecedented time in the history of our county. And I am on team fiscal responsibility for sure, because I don't want any future council to have to go through, or the county go through, what we had to go through during those times. It unfortunately feels like we're about to enter another one. The recession, I'm sure, is being exacerbated by the shutdown. The figure I heard most recently was the state is losing approximately $740 million in tax revenue for each week, and I assume that number will increase. I don't have a great deal of confidence that the shutdown will be ending anytime soon, and so I'm curious as to what provisions we're taking currently and how often are we evaluating now what's transpiring, what can we evaluate, because I suspect the longer this goes, obviously it's going to have an impact in the short and potentially long term.
Mr. Espinosa, do you have any?
Well, like other jurisdictions in this area, we are monitoring what's happening. Clearly, we're concerned about the potential impact, especially on those families that are directly impacted by the loss of income, and those businesses that rely on the activity from those workers. At this point, I don't have any specific information to be able to share with you in terms of that impact. I think you mentioned the information that the state just released. What their analysis indicates is that, and I think you've cited the figure of 700 million. I believe that's the income from these workers, both direct federal employment as well as contractors, over a 2-week period, and that translates into about, I believe, what they cited in their report was about $58 million of tax revenue. So, you know, we're all obviously hopeful that there's a resolution to this as quickly as possible. You know, we expect to see obviously the federal workers being made whole with legislation that's been passed and approved, and you know, we'll be able to see those impacts unfold over the next few months. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the briefing. It's good to always be reminded about the context that we're in. I'm sure the new council members will appreciate this presentation very much as well. I wanted to give credit where it's due here and express a lot of appreciation for the county executive for sending over a savings plan that is intended to meet our reserve target of 10%. That's fundamentally what the savings plan that we are working through right now is for. And I think that is important for us to do. It is, as Council President observed, it is our commitment. The County Council adopted a framework years ago with the county executive saying where we were going, how we were going to address our fiscal situation, how we were going to manage our house. And we adopted a policy of hitting 10%, a 10% reserve. And if we were to back off of that, it would send a real signal that the county is retreating from making the hard decisions to manage our funds and may not be as reliable a place to loan money, and then that would jeopardize our AAA bond rating. And without a AAA, we have to pay a lot more for our school construction and all of our borrowing needs. So the AAA allows our tax dollars to go further. We get more construction for every dollar in taxes that we raise by having a AAA, by getting the lowest possible rates, and by having the best financial position. So I think it's important that the executive sent us a savings plan to get to 10%. We have the job now of kind of finalizing and resolving that plan. And it's important that the executive has sent us a capital budget that sticks to the guideline of gradually ramping down the amount of money that we borrow. And I think we're obviously going to look under the hood of that, and we may have some differences about, the assumptions and things like that. But the big picture is, I think we're in agreement, or we need to be in agreement, that we got to hit 10%. We got to ramp down the amount of money that we're borrowing. We got to exert a little bit more control, or we got to keep our control, I should say. We don't have to exert any more. We just have to keep this in hand. I do look forward to the day when we are not devoting a huge chunk of the new revenue that we get every year to saving for a rainy day. It will be very nice to hit 10% and then be able to not have to add new money every year to that fund, or at least as much. And of course, we're still going to have OPEB to add towards. So it's not going to be easy street anytime soon. We won't go back to the salad days of fiscal recklessness that this county really, got drunk off of in the early 2000s. And I can't help but feel a little bitter about the advocacy that we get. Mention was made of the report that came out today, urging us to go back to a 5% reserve, and just think of all the money you could pass out if you could, unload a couple $100 million more every year, and all the people you could make happy, and so on and so forth. That's what got us into this mess in the first place. That kind of thinking is what got us into this mess. And we have spent years and years digging out from it, and, now is not the time to turn our back on that approach. So, we have our work cut out for us this year to continue in this path. But the next big question, of course, we'll get in the executive's budget is the contracts. And that will be probably the third major element of the fiscal policy in the county. You've got the reserve, you've got OPEB, you've got the contracts. We had a terrific briefing earlier, late in 2018, about the amount of, the affordability of compensation and the rate of growth of contracts compared to the rate of growth of revenue. And I look forward to taking up what the contracts are that we get and using that baseline to assess them. And I would just appeal to all those watching this process that we are not through the woods. This is not a time to be looking for, making up lost steps or other things that, we've heard many times over the years our bargaining unit seeking. We are still very much in a very constrained environment. And I do think that what MCPS is seeking, it seems very reasonable as far as their contract. That's the second year of a 2-year contract. That's a very reasonable approach, but I'll be very surprised if we could do much better than that. So we will see as we get into this. But we got some big topics ahead. Thanks.
Thank you. Before I turn it over to Councilmember Hucker, one of the things that I want to present to my colleagues is for us to schedule some sessions where we can take a step back and have more in-depth conversation on, big picture areas, policy areas that we don't necessarily get to do as a body. And so one of them that I'm considering and would love to work with you as chair of the Fed committee is to have a broad conversation about our economic development strategy, because right now we're talking about our challenges and, the revenues and the expenditures, but to me, what needs to follow or what needs to be hand in hand is what are we doing with the assets that we have all worked so hard to put in place, but how are we now leveraging all of that to be seen as a county that, as I've said before, is hungry, hungry for expanding our tax base, for making sure that we, pursue and change, of course, this image of not being business friendly. That has to go hand in hand, because if not, we're never going to be able to solve these, sort of structural challenges. So stay tuned as we, put that together. And if you have any also ideas of, I envision, a panel that we can then at least begin to put some, broad brushes out there of what it is that we would like to pursue as a body, along with the executive and our partners in the business community. Councilmember Hucker.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you all for this very helpful presentation. Just a few sort of macro questions on what you sent over. In the bullets on page 2, you said that residents below the poverty level increased by 46% over those 14 years. That's obviously not the common perception of Montgomery County, and a story narrative we need to continue to make sure our state legislators are able to recount and share with their colleagues around the state as we seek to get our fair share of state aid. What's the trend within that? How does that compare to the previous 14 years, or what's the trend line? How's the last 5 years compared to the 5 before that?
Again, I'm going to have to check, but my recollection is it's been a steady increase year after year in that direction, that it wasn't over this period that there was one large jump.
A linear increase? Or
a linear increase that keeps increasing.
Right.
The slope is continuing to rise.
Right. The per capita income increase, you have a 67%. Mm-hmm. That's remarkable, very healthy, it sounds like. How does that compare to the state and the nation?
Again, I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay. I'll probably have to send you a bunch of
please,
annoying questions to get back to me with. The per capita income is up 67%. The household income's up 28%. In your experience, Aaron or Jean, is that delta larger than it used to be? Between income, okay.
Same answer.
Individual and household.
Yeah.
And then, and get back to you. I'll also, I wanted to ask about the county execs. I'm glad Alex is here. Projected shortfall on impact, the shortfall of impact tax revenue. What's the driver for that? Is it the pipeline projects, or the write down of the year-end impact tax revenue or some combination, how many projects have come in with the 25% MPDU requirement that is cited?
Well, let me get back to you on that specific question. I don't have an answer for you on that. I think what we were seeing.
On how many projects?
Your specific question on the 25% MPDUs. But I think what we were seeing.
I'd be surprised if we were awash in 25% MPDU projects.
Well, there are a few. I mean, there.
I'm glad there are a few.
Yeah. I mean, I think those are going to have an impact on
Sure.
revenues currently as well as going forward. But I think what we were seeing in terms of general yield from the impact tax is just something that is, reflective of what's happening in the, the general economy. These revenues, specifically these impact taxes, fluctuate very significantly from year to year.
Right.
It's a very volatile source of revenue, and it's very difficult to predict with a lot of accuracy what's going to happen with them. I think what what we saw in terms of what was programmed in the approved CIP was a level that I think was perhaps a little bit overly weighted in terms of some strong growth in the prior year when that estimate was done. So in accumulating more data, more actual experience over the last year or so, we see a forecast now that's a little bit more reasonable and more reflective of what's happening.
I will just add that the Glen Orland Deputy Director is doing a detailed analysis of what happened with the impact taxes. So he will, at some point in the future, be giving the council a very in-depth analysis of what he thinks are the driving forces that led to those changes.
Right. It's my recollection that those are always hard to predict, Alex. You're right. And I think this comes up every year, and the predictions are made by the same able group that makes them every year. So you'll get back to me on the 25%, the number, and also what percentage of the shortfall is due to those, please.
Okay, I'm not. Let me take a look at what
Sure.
we have on that. I just want to caution you and perhaps just say that I'm not sure that we'll be able to tie it specifically to that because there are a lot of factors that go on, and we don't have a lot of access to a lot of the data. But let me look at specifically your question with respect to what was in the pipeline.
Sure, I
for
had
that.
just heard that cited as a key driver, so it's interesting to, I would love to know why that is, as we all try to learn how we got where we are. Thank you.
Councilmember Freeton.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you for a very informative presentation, and thank you, Council President, for your leadership of the council on this and on these issues, and also of the Government Operations Committee. I appreciate being considered a great member of that committee. I'm looking forward to participating in it.
Your reputation precedes you, Councilmember
Well, I
Freeton.
appreciate that.
You made no mistakes yet.
Exactly. I was just going to say that. So I appreciate the fact that because we haven't met yet, I have had the opportunity not to screw up yet. So and I appreciate you giving me credit for that. And but I do look forward to really diving into these in considerable detail and really focusing on some of the longer term challenges that we have talked about, this new council and also the previous council was grappling with, and that's a carryover like the compensation costs and some of the other macro and micro level long term challenges. I did want to highlight a couple points jumping off of where Councilmember Hucker was going. I don't think it was something that he heard. I think that was cited as the only specific reason for the major write-down. I think it's a false and dangerous narrative to pit affordable housing against revenues. I think these are not competing challenges, but complementary challenges, and I think we need to move forward on them. My understanding is there's been two projects, and you don't need to respond, but I just want to kind of put into the record. There have been two projects. I think it's a total of about $11 million of foregone affordable housing, or foregone MPDU in order to grow affordable housing. So obviously, it's a very small piece of that. There might be a few projects in the pipeline where we don't know whether or not they'll get the financing, pull the permits, and forego those property taxes, or whether those projects will change. But that's my understanding. If that understanding is incorrect, I look forward to learning more details, and I am very much looking forward to Glen Orland's detailed report on this, because I think it's particularly important of where the assumptions are, but also where the rhetoric is on this, because I'm more than happy to weigh the deal and whether or not we're getting the best possible deal for these incentives, which is what they are, but they're incentives to solve one of the single most important issues that we face, which is our affordable housing crisis and our cost of housing in general, which is in and of itself a crisis. I mean, this isn't an MPDU challenge. This is a housing crunch, and that is putting a tremendous squeeze on families throughout the county, basically at every income level, by the way. But one other point of clarification, the shutdown numbers, I think the number was 172,000 federal workers and contractors in the state of Maryland and $778 million in lost wages every 2 weeks. We take a disproportionate share of that, not only because of our proximity, but also because of our wages themselves. And so I think as we talk about the shutdown, I appreciate Councilmember Alvarez bringing that up. This is a massive amount of revenue that we'll never see. These families will never see, most importantly, and secondarily, the county will never see in terms of revenues. The contractor wages are a challenge, but also the money that would have been spent is foregone. The challenges that creates, the ripple effect, cannot be undone, and the toothpaste can't be put back on the tube, despite the fact that people pretend that is possible. And so I just wanted to make sure that we deal with that. I heard a lot about the, I also am aware of the SAGE report that came out today that painted a pretty bleak economic picture for us. I am interested in seeing if we could, perhaps have I don't want to say a response, but some type of indication of some of the assumptions that were made there and whether or not we agree with some of those assumptions or whether we disagree with them. I think, just to the point earlier, I think Arlington County, which is smaller, but has a AAA bond rating, and theirs has a lower threshold for their reserves. And I'm not advocating for that one way or the other, but I think it would be helpful to understand, at least from my perspective, of how they have such a low reserve threshold and a AAA bond rating. I'm not saying that is the appropriate way to go, or even if it's analogous to us, but I think it'd be helpful for me as a new council member to understand how that works and how the rating agencies view their reserves versus our reserves, and what sacrifices they've had to make, because I don't think these decisions are made in a vacuum, and so I'd appreciate that. I did have a couple quick questions, and I may be in the Councilmember Hucker camp here of you need to get back to me, but I think you can tell a lot by numbers. I think they pretty much tell the story. We can talk about the rhetoric all we want of what we think things say, but the reality is usually in the underlying numbers. And this really speaks to every challenge I think that we face as a county, and the that Councilmember Hucker was really hinting at was the growing income inequality that's happening in the country is particularly acute here. And if you just go through the numbers, our assessable tax rate's up 101%. While 46%, living below the poverty line. I mean, those incongruent numbers are a reflection of a real challenge. I was curious on the assessable tax rate, if we have an understanding of what percentage of that is based on wage income and what percentage of it is based on capital gains income, because I think that is a really important point. And the reason why I'm asking that question is capital gains income is incredibly volatile. In fact, the state has had to look at making some policy changes based on its assumption on capital gains taxes because of how volatile that is, where the individual decisions of when to accept those can be, I don't want to say manipulated, but can be altered based on tax advantage and also the fluctuations of the marketplace, both the real estate marketplace, but particularly the stock marketplace. Those fluctuations are incredibly challenging. And as as you briefed me recently, and as the previous council was briefed on the compensation costs, and you mentioned the issue of how much of that was related. We kind of got bailed out on a savings and retirement costs, and that is not a sustainable bailout, so to speak. We're not going to get that bailout every time, and so we need to be really cognizant of that and be fiscally prudent when we deal with that. In the same way, if our income is going up, but a disproportionate amount of it, of the growth is in capital gains, which are incredibly volatile, not in wages, which aren't volatile, unless you have a federal government shutdown by a reckless president and Republican Congress. But that puts us in a much more precarious situation.
Yeah, sure. No, I assume you're talking about the assessable tax base on this slide.
Yes.
So this is only referring to the real property assessable base in the county. So we could have noted that a little differently, so our apologies on that. So that's the amount of property value in the county.
Sorry, I misspoke on assessable income. Per capita income, the 67%.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay.
I looked at the wrong statistic point. Per capita income.
I think we're going to send out an email to all council members asking for what data they want, and we will follow up on that and get you all the data points that you need.
But I do think your underlying premise is correct in that the volatility has to do with the capital gains tax. And not only that, but we've learned that it's the top 50 highest earners in the county that are the source of a great deal of this volatility. And it's something that is very hard to predict. As there are changes in tax law or changes in the economy, there can be vast swings. So I think you are right that a good chunk of this is caused by those changes as opposed to changes in annual income outside capital gains.
They're also the most mobile. I mean, these are taxpayers that
Absolutely.
oftentimes have a second home and can change their residency, and their domicile based off of that, and the risk of our policy decisions to what their reactions to those policy decisions are particularly acute. So it would be helpful to know what the breakdown is, and I guess we'll include that in the follow-up.
We'll get back to you on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation. It is very helpful as a general overview. I have a couple questions. I'll try to avoid the super technical questions that you're going to get back to us on the numbers, so I'll scratch those off my list and give a few more general questions that hopefully you can help me out with. There was one slide, maybe if you go back, Gene, where we talked about there's 6% of other taxes, which I'm assuming will include things like vaping tax and all that kind of stuff. I'd love to just see a whole list of the breakdown of what's in that bucket.
I mean, the big ones are the hotel motel tax, the amusement tax, the cigarette tax. There are charges and fines, parking tickets, library fines, but we can get you the whole list.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And
It'll be in the fiscal
amounts.
plan.
And yeah, I'm sure it's all. Yes. I figured that'd be easy to get. And there's been discussion about the SAGE report, which the general thrust of it when I looked at it was it said we must grow our tax base to become more competitive. And I think if you polled the 9 of us, Craig's, and I'll speak, he's in Ethiopia, but I think we would agree with that statement and say that, we can't, if you're going to raise revenues and provide high quality services, you can raise taxes or you can grow the tax base. So I think the issue isn't us disagreeing with that statement, it's how do we get there and what's the path that we chart to do it. I've talked a lot about, and running it for this campaign to get on the council, was that we need to focus on our small and medium-sized businesses. And many of our folks who haven't had the support they need, the 90+% of those who are trying to grow and navigate our regulatory framework and permitting services and all that. And I think many of us want to take action on that. I think that's part of it. We need to retain and recruit the larger businesses as well, and have a broader economic development strategy, as Council President was mentioning. And that's a big part of how we grow the pie so that we can provide these services. But I do want to ask you, and this might be directed to Mr. Espinosa, on that list of where we are in our reserves, right? So we have to do the stuff we need to do to grow our economy and expand the tax base. And we're going to be working on that in earnest. And I'm on the Fed committee. That's something I'm really concerned about. We're approaching 10%. You said that puts us in slightly below the median in the reserves of comparable jurisdictions. What are the other jurisdictions? Can you give me an example of one or two that are comparable size and scale that might be a lower number? And are there things that stuck out when you did your analysis, and I'm assuming the FA analysis you talked about, of things they did in conjunction with lowering their reserve amount that allowed them to still have a AAA bond rating?
Okay, well,
Do you understand the question?
Let me
want me to
just
restart?
try to answer, and hopefully I can get to the gist of your question. These other jurisdictions, I guess the sort of what's out there in terms of where they are with respect to their reserves, we just need to make a distinction between what is their reserve policy or reserve target versus where their actual reserves are. And those are, things that the rating agencies and others look at, and they make a distinction between the two. Generally speaking, rating agencies don't necessarily, prescribe a specific policy or a target for a particular jurisdiction. They obviously want you to have a policy and be able to, stand by your policy, live by your policy, and maintain your policies over time. But principally and significantly, what they tend to look at is sort of your performance over a period of time, and they look at you compared to your comparable jurisdictions, both in the region as well as nationally. And most of these jurisdictions, as I indicated, the ones we compare ourselves to, or many of them, have higher reserve levels than we do. I think those are going to be related to specific things that are going on in those particular jurisdictions, so you have to take a look at that. I know for Montgomery County, obviously, we've talked a little bit about it today with respect to our revenue profile being highly volatile with respect to the income tax. That makes us more susceptible to swings in the economy as well as taxpayer behavior. And what that would indicate is, in our case, potentially having higher reserves than some of these other jurisdictions that are not as dependent on income taxes, for example. They're more generally property tax-based jurisdictions. So I think with respect to your question, what have some of these jurisdictions done to lower their reserves? They really haven't gone in that direction. The ones that have tend to get themselves into trouble with rating agencies. I believe, one jurisdiction in Maryland, Baltimore County, is presently on negative outlook for Moody's because of their debt position and a trend over the last few years with respect to drawing down reserves.
And to the Council President's point, it would be helpful for me to have a deeper analysis of the why and the reasons of, obviously, at that point you made about that we're relying on a lot of income tax, and that's very volatile, would mean that we need to be a little higher. I just think we need to be looking at the whole gamut of what's possible and what we need to be doing. I think we need to be fiscally sound. I think where we were in the early 2000s were not the way to go. But I would like to just, as we're analyzing these things moving forward, look at that. I'm sure there has to be some similar jurisdictions that have grappled with these decisions, why the rating agencies kept their AAA bond rating. If you're at 5% and you're the same size as us, is it just because you don't rely on income tax? Like, what are those reasons? I just want to dig into that more, and so maybe you have an analysis you can send over, or we can share, or move forward. We can have some of that, a briefing for the council. We'll be happy to do that.
And we have some information, too, that we can share with you. I just want to say, following up on what Alex said, that it's often not a single indicator, reserves, that determines the bond rating. It's the interplay between reserves and tax base and debt and OPEB and pensions, and where one jurisdiction might have a
Economic growth.
weakness in one thing, they might have a strength in another that protects. And it's in essence the whole portfolio that needs to be sound, and that they're compensate for weakness in one area with the strength in another area.
Thank you.
Thank you for making that clarification, because it is true. I mean, the one thing that has kept us, I think, on a steady path has been this notion that we came in and we said, this is what we commit to do regardless, and we have done that, especially with the reserves. I don't know why there is so much energy around lowering or not meeting our 10% goal. It's just beyond me. I mean, if we didn't learn from what happened during the recession, I don't know what other lesson we're going to learn. And the fact that we're so close, and that once we meet it, I mean, I don't hear anybody saying that now we need to bump it to 15%. I mean, once we meet it, we're going to have that additional revenue then, for us to do all the things that we need to do. But it's been, there's been so much effort put into ensuring that we would go in there being able to demonstrate that we have met our targets and that we're getting closer and closer. I really don't understand why there's so much energy, again, around this notion of let's lower it. I would never, support doing that. I think it's fiscally irresponsible. And hey, one thing is for certain, that a recession may come along sooner than we think. So having that reserve level, I think it's something that speaks very, well for us as a county. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate all the great questions my colleagues have asked, thus limiting the questions I have remaining, so that's always good. But I do want to pick up and follow up on Councilmember Hucker's focused questions, particularly the average household income that increased by 28%, while on the face it sounds great, but how is that pegged to inflation over this 14-year period?
That we can get you. That we have data readily available, and we can correct it for inflation, yeah.
Thank you. And then the other question is taking a macro look at these trends. So over a 14-year period, total households have increased by 11%. Total population has increased by 14%. And MCPS enrollment has increased by 18%. So as we are to try and forecast all of this, it seems like it's really hard to do that. So what is your take on those numbers specifically?
The obvious ones, the household sizes are increasing, and you can think of the many economic factors that can cause that. In terms of MCPS enrollment, I would defer to them about the different factors in terms of birth rate and in-migration, out-migration, public versus private school enrollment. There are many, many factors that contribute to that.
And so on the face of it, with these statistics, the number of households having more children going into MCPS is greater than the number of housing that is actually being built.
I can't say being built, that number of households that exist. I can't.
Okay.
Yeah.
I appreciate that clarification. So the number of, it exceeds the number of households in the county.
Household size has increased, and therefore there are more people per household, both populating the county as a whole and those of school age going into MCPS, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you very much. Continuing on this issue of the 10% reserve, I'm reminded of a leadership exercise I participated in where they sort of are teaching you, aspects of how you confront challenges. And we did this exercise where you're supposed to walk on a rope, and it's really hard. And the lesson of the whole thing was that most people give up just before they are about to succeed. That you go through all this effort, and then you finally just throw in the towel and you quit. And what you don't realize is that if you had just gone that final step, you would have actually broken through and you would have succeeded. And that's kind of where we are right now with this whole 10% conversation. We're almost at 10%. We've got to make some final tough decisions to get there. We're about to hit 10%. It's terrific that the county executive has sent us a savings plan to do that. We got to follow through on that. We're in a constrained environment. But there's no question, there's no discussion to be had about abandoning 10%. Now, I will say the county executive chief administrative officer, Andrew Klein, has talked about a risk-adjusted reserve approach. And I think that there is apparently a methodology for how you think about the reserve, and we should look into that, and it could find that we could do less. I think it'll probably find that we should do more because of what you said, Alex, which is that we are not a property tax revenue jurisdiction substantially. And that is one of the secrets of this county, is a secret sauce for this county. We have income tax. How many local governments in America have income tax? Not that many. And how many of them have income tax and have high wealth populations? Very few. That income tax is what enables us to pay for our schools and our transit and everything. But it has its consequences as well. It's very volatile. It swings with the economy. It swings with the market. So we have the unique advantage of an income tax. We may also have a unique requirement to hedge against that in a higher reserve. So we'll see what this risk-adjusted approach might show for us. But if it shows us that we have to work our way towards 15%, that's what we should have. Then that's what we should do. I mean, we get the benefit of income tax and high income population. There's certain obligations that come with that, that we have to embrace. Secondly, to the council president's urging that we tackle economic development here. I think that's a terrific idea. And we had a great discussion last week with the MCEDC, and they've outlined a strategic economic plan for the county. I think it would be terrific to maybe bring them to the full council and talk about some of their goals, because, this pathetic report that was just released, advocating that we ought to throw away our AAA and go to a 5% reserve, that if we just created liquor stores on the corners, that would really drive economic prosperity. It was lame. I mean, it was just lame, a lame report. A lot of sizzle, no steak. The MCEDC has an actual strategy. It tells us what we should actually be thinking about doing. And it's like they would laugh at the suggestion that creating liquor stores on the corners is going to somehow drive economic development. It might or might not be good in other ways, but it's got really very little to do with the prosperity of our community and the long-term economic vitality of our community. That is about talent and workforce development and affordable housing, workforce housing, transportation infrastructure, and all these other things. So I think maybe working with them would be a great way to frame that conversation. Last thing I wanted to just observe, our slowdown in revenue for the capital budget is substantially about a slowdown in school impact tax revenue because we're not getting any development, actually. It's partly because the development that we're getting is happening in our transit proximate areas where we have a lower development tax rate. But it's fundamentally because we don't also have a lot of development, which is ironic considering all the hullabaloo you hear about how development is, draining us or overwhelming us. Gwen Wright this past week at the Fed committee said that she's done a review and there were only 800 new housing units added to the tax rolls in 2018. Only 800 units added to the rolls. Thousands of people moving into this county every year. We're not producing any housing. The result of that is we have an affordability crunch, an affordability crisis, and we have no income tax revenue. And those high-rise apartments that everybody talks about, the county doesn't, understand we do understand the demographic projections for high-rise apartments. And guess what? There's very few kids in them, and they're typically higher income, and that is how we fund our schools. Because we get impact tax revenue for the capital budget, and we get property tax and income tax for the operating budget. And when you have a high-rise apartment building in downtown Bethesda with several hundred higher income tax-paying residents, they are paying for far more than the impact of the students that might be generated. They are helping to pay for the schools, whether it's on the construction or the operating budget side. So this whole conversation about development is kind of missing the mark about how we pay for things in this county. And we have a housing moratorium that's coming our way now. We're going to have to grapple with in this year's budget. We've got 6 high schools potentially going into moratorium, high school districts, which is like half of the developable county. So we've got some really big issues to resolve here, or we're going to be continuing to grapple with cuts and downward spirals.
Not a simple thing. Councilmember Hucker.
Thank you, Council President. Don't have a speech, just a couple more questions I was reminded. One, can I ask you about the win case projections, win decision? Last year's estimate of revenue loss was 16.7 million, and now it's up to 30 million per year?
I think that's what we've had in the update the last couple of times. That's sort of the ongoing impact that we estimate from WIN based on data from the controller's office.
Why is it up so dramatically, one year to the next, from last year's revenue?
Well, again,
projected revenue loss.
Last year, I'd have to check the date on that, but that's kind of been our estimate since about last year.
Okay, I was just reading from the packet. I don't know if you guys can shine any light on that, but that seems like
So
it's the same analysts are making.
In terms of what's in the fiscal plan with respect to the impact from WIN, we've got that built in starting in FY21 in terms of the scheduled repayments from the the prior refunds that have been already paid by the state.
Right, no,
Okay.
that might be right. I'm just wondering why the same analyst thought it was 16.7 million last year, if it's now 30.
I might be mixing up my dates, but I think we'll look into that, because what the packet includes the cost of driving government from January, which is a year ago, Analyst Sesker was, and so that was just a primer in terms of a larger conversation here, rather than rewriting and updating. So we'll get back to you on that one.
Would you? Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
that was just a attachment.
It's kind of a big difference. And it's the same finite number of individuals we're talking about, right? I mean, some things are hard to analyze and some things aren't, and that seems more straightforward than many things, I would think. Also, I know I always ask for this, but you guys are definitely going to send us these slides? It would be helpful? Thank you.
Yep.
It's always great when they're in the packet. It's so convenient, the one that's in front of us on revenue. To me, that says property tax and income tax adds up to 69%. Is that right or wrong?
For the total revenues that we were projecting in fiscal 19, that is correct.
Okay, so how does that jive with page 2 and 3 of the packet that says property income tax together constitute 87% of revenue?
That may be a typo. That would be 87% of our tax revenue. So again, this includes 18% for federal and state aid, which is not tax revenue.
Different denominator.
Correct.
Okay. And then third, on the fuel and energy, I hope it's the third, fuel and energy tax. The thing that jumped out at me that seemed I was struggling to understand is the fuel tax is down a lot. That's too bad, I guess, for us at least, maybe not for the world. But the suggested driver is 2 consecutive warm winters, meaning we're using less energy. I'm not sure we're using less energy according to federal and state and utility projections, but aren't the 2 warm winters offset by the larger fact that the 3 hottest years on record were the last 3 years? Aren't people using more air conditioning in the summer if they're using less heat in the winter?
I will defer to finance on this one because the council staff relies on their projections. So our understanding is based on the natural gas cost and usage is the primary, one of the reasons we were experiencing a downturn in our energy tax. But if Mr. Espinosa has more he wants to share, all that.
Again, I think our update in December had the energy tax pretty much tracking in line with what we had originally estimated for FY19. I don't know if these guys want to clarify any of that with more details. But, generally speaking, absent any rate changes, we see a pretty consistent trend line on the energy tax, relatively flat. And again, depending on what's going on in terms of weather, it might spike up and down from year to year, but it's a generally flat trend line, absent any change in the rates that are going on.
Dennis Hetman, Department of Finance. We take an econometric approach with respect to the fuel energy tax. We look at each individual component, and there's been a real glacial slow in the use of natural gas. That's really what's pulling it down.
In the use, or also are the prices, is the price down?
More
So then you
usage than
collect
price.
Less
exactly.
tax, okay.
And we go back historically as far as we can, which is about 10 years.
Okay. And what about electricity?
That's more consistent. It's pretty, there hasn't been a great deal of growth, but the growth for each of the components has been muted over the past couple of years.
Okay.
And we can get you all those numbers.
Thanks. That would be great. It would be great. And yeah, my guess is it's not because of the weather then. Okay, thank you very much. Very helpful.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody, for this really wonderful and engaging conversation. Very important as we start the year, and we'll be facing some interesting decisions very soon. But I think this has been very, very useful. I hope my colleagues have found it useful, and we will continue to discuss other components such as the economic development piece. So now I'd like to propose a closed session for the purpose of consulting with counsel to obtain legal advice and to consult about pending or potential litigation pursuant to Maryland Code General Provision Article 3-305B7 and 8. Topic is pending litigation. Moved by Council Vice President Katz and second by Councilmember Hucker. All those in favor, please signify. Raising your hand, it's unanimous. by those present. All right, we're going to go to the third floor conference room, and then at 2 p.m., the TNE committee will have a committee meeting on the 7th floor council hearing room.